You're nothing but a waste of space, Sarah. Always have been, always will be. Those were the last words my mother, Patricia Whitmore, said to me before I walked out of her house in Millbrook Valley 15 years ago. She screamed them from her front porch while our entire neighborhood watched, her face twisted with disgust as I loaded my beaten-up Honda with everything I owned. Today, I'm standing in the hallway of Riverside Medical Center, the most prestigious hospital in the state, wearing surgical scrubs that cost more than my mother's monthly rent. And in exactly 30 minutes, I'll be the only person standing between Patricia Whitmore and death. The irony isn't lost on me. The waste of space she threw away like garbage is now Dr. Sarah Smith, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery, the woman whose hands will determine whether she lives or dies. The daughter, she said would never amount to anything, is the only surgeon in a 200-mile radius capable of performing the complex procedure that could save her failing heart. But here's the thing about being called worthless your entire childhood. It either destroys you or it forges you into something unbreakable. My mother chose the first path for herself. I chose the second. I remember the exact moment she said those words. I was 22, fresh out of college with a biology degree and a dream of medical school. I'd come home to Millbrook Valley, a small manufacturing town where dreams go to die, to ask for help with my medical school applications. Not money. I knew better than to ask Patricia Whitmore for money she didn't have and wouldn't give anyway. I just wanted emotional support. Maybe a signature on a recommendation letter. Perhaps just the acknowledgement that her daughter was trying to build something meaningful. Instead, I got the performance of a lifetime. Medical school? She'd laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that held any warmth. It was the sound of breaking glass. Sarah, honey, you can barely balance a checkbook. You think you're smart enough to be a doctor? You think you're special? She'd been drinking. She was always drinking, but alcohol had never made her cruel before. It just made her honest. You've been filling your head with fantasies since you were little. Remember when you wanted to be an astronaut, a writer, a teacher? Now it's doctor. Next month it'll be something else. You know what you are? You're a dreamer. And dreamers in this family end up like your father, dead broke and disappointed. She'd stood up from her kitchen table then, swaying slightly, pointing a finger at me like I was on trial. I've wasted enough time and energy on your delusions. You want to play pretend doctor? Fine. But don't come crying to me when reality hits you in the face. You're nothing but a waste of space, Sarah. Always have been, always will be. The neighbors had started gathering by then. Mrs. Henderson from next door pretending to water her already dead roses. The Martinez family across the street suddenly very interested in checking their mailbox. In Millbrook Valley, drama was entertainment, and Patricia Whitmore screaming at her daughter was primetime television. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream back. I didn't beg for her approval or try to convince her she was wrong. Something cold and determined had settled into my chest, something that felt like steel wrapping around my spine. I looked at this woman who'd given birth to me but had never once acted like a mother, and I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't say out loud for another 15 years. I promised myself that one day she would need me. One day the roles would reverse. One day the waste of space would be the only thing standing between her and the consequences of a lifetime of poor choices. I loaded my car in silence while she stood on that porch, arms crossed, watching me like I was a tenant being evicted rather than her daughter leaving home forever. I drove away from Millbrook Valley with $347 in my checking account, a medical school application deadline in 6 weeks, and absolutely no one in my corner. But I had something else. I had rage. Clean, pure, focused rage that I channeled into every late-night study session, every double shift at the diner where I worked to pay for school, and every rejection letter I received before finally getting accepted to Westfield Medical College. When other students complained about the workload, I studied harder. When they went out partying, I was in the library until closing time. When they called home for emotional support during the brutal first year, I had no one to call. And it made me stronger. Now, 15 years later, Patricia Whitmore is lying unconscious in room 314, her heart failing after decades of cigarettes, alcohol, and the kind of stress that comes from being angry at the world for problems you created yourself. The cardiologist who examined her pulled me aside an hour ago with the kind of expression doctors reserve for impossible situations. Sarah, I'm going to be straight with you. She needs a valve replacement and bypass surgery, but her case is complicated. The damage is extensive. The scarring from what looks like years of untreated hypertension has created adhesions that make this incredibly risky. I've called every cardiothoracic surgeon in the state. 3 of them said it's inoperable. 2 said they'd try, but gave her less than a 30% chance. You're the only one with enough experience in complex revision surgeries who might, and I emphasize might, be able to save her.
She didn't know. Dr. Cross had no idea that the patient in room 314 was my mother. To her, this was just another consultation, another complicated case. To me, it was the universe's sense of humor finally kicking in. Because Patricia Whitmore, the woman who told me I'd never amount to anything, is about to discover that her waste of space daughter is literally the only thing standing between her and death. And I get to decide whether she's worth saving. Let me tell you who I really am, because the woman lying in that hospital bed never bothered to find out. My name is Dr. Sarah Elizabeth Smith. I'm 37 years old, and I've performed over 2,000 successful cardiac surgeries in my career. I'm the youngest chief of cardiothoracic surgery in Riverside Medical Center's 150-year history. Last month, I was featured on the cover of Medical Excellence Quarterly for pioneering a new technique that's reduced cardiac surgery mortality rates by 15%. The article called me the Heart Whisperer, a title that makes me cringe, but one that my patients' families seem to appreciate when I'm explaining why their loved one is going to live. I graduated summa cum laude from Westfield Medical College, completed my residency at Boston General Hospital, and finished my fellowship at the Cleveland Heart Institute under Dr. Jonathan Reeves, one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the world. When I applied for the position here at Riverside, I had 17 job offers from hospitals across the country. I chose this one because it's exactly 47 miles from Millbrook Valley, close enough to matter, far enough to breathe. My colleagues call me dedicated. My residents call me demanding but fair. My patients call me a miracle worker. The hospital board calls me their most valuable asset. But you know what Patricia Whitmore called me the last time we spoke? A disappointment who was too proud to admit when she was wrong. That conversation happened 3 years ago. Not because I sought it out, but because my mother's neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, the same woman who'd watched our final confrontation 15 years earlier, tracked me down through the hospital directory. She called my office on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice shaky with what I now recognize as guilt. "Dr. Smith, this is Dorothy Henderson from Millbrook Valley. I knew you when you were little Sarah Whitmore, before you left. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I thought you should know. Your mother's been sick, really sick. She's been telling everyone in town that her daughter is a famous doctor now, that you're saving lives and making a difference. She carries around that magazine article about you in her purse, shows it to anyone who'll listen." I'd sat in my office chair, staring out at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, listening to this woman destroy everything I thought I knew about my mother's opinion of me. "Mrs. Henderson," I'd said carefully, "I think you might have me confused with someone else. My mother made it very clear 15 years ago that she wanted nothing to do with me or my career." "Oh, honey," Mrs. Henderson had sighed, "Patricia's proud as a peacock about you. She's got her pride, you know. She's been saying for years that she was wrong about you, that she was drunk and angry and said things she didn't mean. But she doesn't know how to reach out. She thinks you hate her." The conversation had lasted 23 minutes. I know because I'd stared at my office clock the entire time, watching the second hand tick while Mrs. Henderson painted a picture of a woman I didn't recognize. A mother who'd apparently been following my career from afar, collecting newspaper clippings about my achievements, telling anyone who'd listen that her daughter was saving lives. After I hung up, I'd done something I hadn't done in 15 years. I'd looked up Patricia Whitmore's phone number. I even dialed 6 of the 7 digits before hanging up and going back to work. That weekend, I'd driven to Millbrook Valley for the first time since I'd left. Not to see her, I wasn't ready for that, just to see if anything had changed in the town that felt like a prison when I was growing up. The main street looked smaller, shabbier, half the storefronts were empty. The factory that had employed most of the town had closed 5 years earlier, Mrs. Henderson had mentioned. I'd driven past my childhood home, a small 2-bedroom house with peeling paint and a front yard that had never quite recovered from my father's death when I was 12. The mailbox still read P. Whitmore in faded letters. Through the living room window, I could see the same furniture, the same yellow walls, the same sense of stagnation that had driven me away. But I couldn't bring myself to knock on the door. Instead, I drove to Millbrook General, the small community hospital where I'd volunteered as a teenager, filing papers and dreaming of one day wearing a doctor's coat. I spoke with Dr. Amanda Rivers, the chief of staff, about establishing a cardiac screening program for the community. Within 6 months, I was flying back twice a month to provide free consultations for residents who couldn't afford to travel to Riverside for specialized care. I never told anyone my name was Sarah Whitmore. I was Dr. Smith, the visiting cardiologist from the big city hospital, professional, distant, helpful, but not personal. For 3 years, I'd been saving the hearts of my mother's neighbors while avoiding my own.
And in all that time, Patricia Whitmore never once showed up at those clinics, never once took advantage of the free cardiac screenings that might have caught her condition before it became life-threatening. Whether it was pride, fear, or the simple inability to admit she needed help from anyone, especially her daughter, I'll never know. What I do know is this. I've spent 15 years building a reputation based on saving people who others couldn't save. I've pulled patients back from the brink of death when every other doctor said it was hopeless. I've given families their mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters back when they'd already started planning funerals. I've proven beyond any doubt that the waste of space Patricia Whitmore threw away was actually worth something after all. Now, the question isn't whether I'm qualified to save her life. The question is whether she deserves to have it saved. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning. I know the exact time because I was already awake, reviewing surgical notes for a complex aortic valve replacement scheduled for later that day. My phone buzzed with the emergency ringtone reserved for the hospital, a sound that could pull me from the deepest sleep and instantly flood my system with adrenaline. Dr. Smith, we need you here immediately. It was Dr. Martinez from the emergency department, his voice carrying that particular tension that comes with life or death situations. We have a 57-year-old female, massive anterior wall myocardial infarction. She's coding blue and we can't get her stabilized. I was already reaching for my scrubs before he finished the sentence. Time since onset? Paramedics estimate 43 minutes. She was found unconscious by a neighbor who heard her calling for help through the walls. No family present, but she had identification. Patricia Whitmore from Millbrook Valley. The world stopped. Not the dramatic movie-style freeze where everything goes silent and fades to black. This was different. This was the sensation of every atom in my body suddenly understanding something my brain wasn't ready to process. The phone stayed pressed to my ear, Dr. Martinez's voice continuing with medical details, blood pressure dropping, oxygen saturation critical, multiple attempts at cardioversion, but I couldn't hear anything except the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Dr. Smith, are you there? I'm here. My voice sounded remarkably steady considering that my entire world had just shifted on its axis. What's her current status? We've got her back in sinus rhythm, but barely. Blood pressure is 78/45 and falling. We've started pressors, but her heart is struggling. Dr. Williams is with her now, but he's requesting immediate cardiothoracic consultation. Can you be here in 20 minutes? 20 minutes to drive from my downtown apartment to Riverside Medical Center. 20 minutes to prepare myself to see the woman who had destroyed my self-worth with a single sentence, now fighting for her life. 20 minutes to decide whether I was Dr. Sarah Smith, the professional who took an oath to save lives, or Sarah Whitmore, the daughter who still carried 15 years of rage in her chest. "I'll be there in 15, I said, already heading for the door. The drive through the empty city streets felt both eternal and instantaneous. Traffic lights blinked yellow in the pre-dawn darkness, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I could feel my knuckles aching. I tried to focus on the medical aspects. Anterior wall MI in a 57-year-old female, likely multi-vessel disease given her age and probable risk factors, would need immediate catheterization and possible surgical intervention. But my mind kept drifting to things that had nothing to do with medicine. I thought about the last time I'd seen Patricia Whitmore's face, twisted with anger and disappointment on that front porch in Millbrook Valley. I thought about Mrs. Henderson's phone call 3 years ago, her voice gentle as she tried to convince me that my mother had changed, that she'd been proud of me all along. I thought about the cardiac screening clinics I'd been running in Millbrook Valley, how I'd secretly hoped that maybe, just maybe, Patricia would show up one day and give me the chance to save her before it was too late. Now it might be too late anyway. When I pulled into the hospital parking garage, my phone buzzed again. Dr. Martinez updating me on her condition. Pressure's holding steady with maximum pressor support, but she's had 2 more episodes of VTAC. We need to move fast. The elevator ride to the cardiac ICU felt like it lasted hours. I stared at my reflection in the polished steel doors, Dr. Sarah Smith in surgical scrubs, hair pulled back, face composed and professional. I looked exactly like what I was, a competent surgeon responding to an emergency. But underneath that exterior, Sarah Whitmore was screaming. The cardiac ICU was controlled chaos when I arrived. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency around bed 3. Monitors beeped incessantly, and the smell of antiseptic mixed with the underlying tension that always filled rooms where people fought for their lives. Dr. Williams, the attending cardiologist, met me at the nurse's station with Patricia's chart and the grim expression I'd seen 1,000 times before. "Sarah, thank God you're here. This is a complicated case. Take a look at these EKGs." He spread the cardiac tracings across the counter, pointing to the telltale signs of massive heart muscle death. The damage was extensive, worse than I'd expected from Dr. Martinez's initial description. The anterior wall of her heart, the main pumping chamber, had been devastated by the lack of blood flow. But it was the progression of the EKGs over the past hour that told the real story.
"She's having ongoing ischemia," I said, studying the patterns. "This isn't just one blocked artery. She's got multi-vessel disease, and we're looking at cardiogenic shock." Exactly. We need to get her to the cath lab immediately. But honestly, Sarah, I'm not sure catheterization alone is going to be enough. The echo shows an ejection fraction of less than 20%. She's going to need surgical intervention, and soon. I nodded, still staring at the EKGs, my medical training taking over even as my personal world spun out of control. What about family? Has anyone been contacted? That's the strange thing. We found her emergency contact information in her purse, but the number she listed is disconnected. There was also a business card for a law office and what looks like a stack of newspaper clippings, but no current family contacts. The neighbor who found her, a Mrs. Henderson, said she thought Patricia had a daughter somewhere, but they hadn't spoken in years. Mrs. Henderson. Of course it was Mrs. Henderson who found her, the same woman who'd called me 3 years ago, who'd tried to bridge the gap between a stubborn mother and an equally stubborn daughter, the same woman who was probably sitting in the family waiting room right now, wondering if anyone would come for Patricia Whitmore. "Dr. Smith, are you ready to examine the patient?" I looked up to find Dr. Williams watching me with concern. Professional focus, I reminded myself. Save first, process later. Yes, let's see what we're dealing with. As we approached bed 3, I could see Patricia for the first time in 15 years. The woman who had loomed so large in my memory, who had seemed so powerful and intimidating in my childhood, looked small and fragile against the white hospital sheets. Her face was pale, almost gray, and she appeared older than her 57 years.
The ventilator breathed for her with mechanical precision, and multiple IV lines snaked from her arms to various pumps and monitors. But even unconscious, even fighting for her life, she looked exactly like the woman who called me a waste of space. The same sharp cheekbones, the same stubborn set to her jaw, and the same hands that had pointed at me in accusation all those years ago. Dr. Williams began presenting her case in clinical detail, but I was only half listening, because as I stood there looking at Patricia Whitmore, my mother, struggling against death, I realized that this moment had been inevitable from the day I walked out of Millbrook Valley. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd always known it would come down to this. Her life in my hands, and me holding all the power. The question was, what was I going to do with it? I should have treated her like any other patient. I should have focused on the medicine, made the clinical decisions, and let my training take over. But as I stood beside Patricia's bed, watching the monitors track her failing heart, all I could think about was the conversation that destroyed our relationship and how she doubled down on it 3 years ago. It hadn't been enough for Patricia to call me a waste of space and watch me drive away. When I'd finally worked up the courage to call her 3 years later, after Mrs. Henderson's revelation about her supposed pride in my achievements, I discovered that some people never change. They just get better at justifying their cruelty. I dialed her number on a Sunday evening, my hands shaking as I listened to the phone ring in that familiar house. When she answered, her voice was exactly the same, that flat, guarded tone she'd always used when she expected disappointment. "Hello? Mom? It's Sarah." The silence that followed lasted 17 seconds. I counted them, sitting in my office overlooking the city, watching the sun set behind the skyline while I waited for my mother to acknowledge that her daughter was calling her for the first time in 12 years. Sarah. Not a question, not an exclamation, just my name spoken like it left a bitter taste in her mouth. "I heard you were sick," I said carefully. "Mrs. Henderson called me. She thought I should know." "Dorothy Henderson needs to mind her own damn business." Patricia's voice was sharp, defensive. "I'm fine. I don't need anything from you." "I'm not offering anything specific. I wanted to talk. Maybe we could—" "Talk about what, Sarah? About how you ran off to play doctor and never looked back? About how you were too good for your old mother and your own hometown?" The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "You ran off? Mom, you literally called me a waste of space and told me I'd never amount to anything. You destroyed my self-confidence so thoroughly that I spent years in therapy learning how to believe in myself again." Oh, here we go. I could hear her moving around the house, probably pacing the way she always did when she was agitated. "Everything is my fault? Poor little Sarah, the victim. Do you know what it was like for me after you left? Do you know what it felt like to have the whole town asking where my daughter went, why she never called, why she never visited?"
"I was drunk," she shouted, and I heard something crash in the background, probably a glass hitting the wall. "I was drunk and angry and scared about money, and I said things I shouldn't have said. But instead of being an adult about it, instead of understanding that people make mistakes when they're struggling, you just disappeared. You couldn't even be bothered to let me know you were alive." I'd sat there, phone pressed to my ear, feeling 15 years old again. Because this was exactly what Patricia Whitmore did. She took your pain and somehow made it about her suffering. She took your legitimate grievances and turned them into character flaws. She took your attempts at healing and transformed them into attacks on her. "I was 22 years old," I'd said quietly. "I was your daughter. I came to you for support during one of the most important moments of my life, and you told me I was worthless. What exactly was I supposed to do with that? You were supposed to forgive me." The words came out like a sob, raw and desperate. "You were supposed to understand that I was in pain too. Your father died and left me with nothing but bills and a daughter who thought she was too good for the life I could give her. I was terrified you'd leave anyway, so maybe I pushed you away first. For a moment, just a moment, I'd felt something crack inside my chest. Because that sounded like insight. That sounded like self-awareness. That sounded like the beginning of an apology that might actually mean something. "Mom," I started, "if you felt that way, why didn't you?" "But you know what, Sarah? I was right." Her voice had turned cold again, the brief vulnerability disappearing like it had never existed. "Look at you now, Dr. Sarah Smith, with your fancy hospital and your big city life. You proved my point perfectly. You were too good for us. You were always planning to leave, and you did. You became exactly the kind of person who thinks they're better than where they came from." That's not, isn't it? When's the last time you visited Millbrook Valley? When's the last time you thought about the people who knew you before you became important? You got what you wanted, a life where Patricia Whitmore doesn't exist. The conversation had ended there, not with yelling or dramatic pronouncements, but with exhaustion. I'd hung up the phone and sat in my office until the cleaning crew arrived, staring at the city lights and wondering how the same woman could be simultaneously proud of my achievements and resentful of my success. Now, 3 years later, I was standing over Patricia's unconscious body while Dr. Williams explained her treatment options. But all I could hear was her voice from that phone call. "You got exactly what you wanted, a life where Patricia Whitmore doesn't exist." The irony was perfect, because in about 30 minutes, I would have the power to make Patricia Whitmore not exist. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, but literally. I could make surgical decisions that prioritized her survival, or I could make clinical judgments that prioritized other things. "Dr. Smith?" Dr. Williams was looking at me expectantly. "What's your assessment?" I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel small, who had taken my attempt at reconciliation and twisted it into another weapon to use against me. The woman who couldn't even face her own mortality without finding a way to blame me for it. "It's complicated," I said. Standing there in the cardiac ICU, watching Patricia's chest rise and fall with mechanical precision, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, more like the moment when you realize you've been holding your breath for years and finally allow yourself to exhale.
Dr. Williams was still waiting for my assessment, his pen poised over Patricia's chart, but I couldn't speak yet. Because for the first time in my adult life, I was seeing Patricia Whitmore clearly, not through the lens of a hurt daughter seeking approval, not through the filter of a professional trying to prove her worth, but with the crystalline clarity that comes when you finally stop trying to change someone who has shown you exactly who they are. "Give me a moment to review her labs," I said to Dr. Williams, buying myself time to process what was happening in my head. As I flipped through Patricia's medical records, I wasn't really reading the numbers. Instead, I was remembering something my mentor, Dr. Jonathan Reeves, had told me during my fellowship at Cleveland Heart Institute. We'd been discussing a particularly difficult case, a patient whose family was demanding aggressive treatment despite a hopeless prognosis. "Sarah," he'd said, "the hardest lesson you'll learn as a surgeon isn't how to save people. It's how to recognize when saving someone isn't the same as helping them. And it's learning that your oath as a physician doesn't require you to sacrifice your own humanity on the altar of other people's expectations." At the time, I thought he was talking about futile care and end-of-life decisions. Now, I understood he'd been preparing me for moments like this, moments when the person you're supposed to save is the same person who tried to destroy you. I looked at Patricia's face, peaceful in unconsciousness, and felt the last vestiges of my childhood need for her approval finally crumble. This woman had spent 37 years of my life teaching me that I wasn't enough. She'd taken every achievement, every success, every attempt at connection, and found a way to diminish it. She'd made me believe that love was something you had to earn through perfect performance, and that no performance would ever be perfect enough. But here's what Patricia had never understood. By rejecting me so completely, she'd accidentally given me the greatest gift possible. She'd forced me to learn how to love myself without needing external validation. She'd taught me that my worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's opinion. She'd shown me that I could survive being unloved by the person who was supposed to love me unconditionally. Dr. Martinez appeared at my elbow, tablet in hand. "Dr. Smith, we've got the latest cardiac enzymes back. Troponin is over 50. This is massive." I nodded, still not fully focused on the medical details, because something else was becoming clear to me as I stood there. This moment, Patricia's life hanging in the balance, me holding the power to save or lose her, this wasn't the universe's idea of poetic justice. This was my final exam. Not the medical kind. I'd passed those years ago. This was the test of whether I'd truly healed from the damage she'd inflicted, or whether I was still that 22-year-old girl desperate for mommy's approval. The old Sarah, the one who'd driven away from Millbrook Valley with tears streaming down her face, would have seen this as an opportunity for revenge. She would have wanted Patricia to wake up and realize that her waste-of-space daughter was the only thing standing between her and death. She would have wanted Patricia to beg, to apologize, to finally acknowledge that she'd been wrong about everything. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I'd spent 15 years building a life based on my own values, not Patricia's limitations. I'd saved thousands of lives, not to prove anything to her, but because saving lives was who I chose to be. I'd become a leader in my field not because I needed external validation, but because I was genuinely good at what I did and passionate about advancing cardiac surgery. The woman lying in this bed had taught me through her absence and rejection how to be complete on my own. She'd accidentally created exactly the person she claimed I could never become. "Dr. Smith," Dr. Williams was looking at me with growing concern. "Are you all right? You seem distracted." I closed Patricia's chart and looked at him directly. "I'm fine. I was just thinking about something my mentor, Dr. Jonathan Reeves, once told me about the difference between saving someone and helping them." "What do you mean?" I turned back to Patricia's monitors, watching the numbers that represented her body's fight for survival. He said that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive patterns. Sometimes saving someone's life isn't the same as giving them what they need. Dr. Williams frowned. "I'm not sure I follow. Are you suggesting we shouldn't pursue aggressive treatment?" "I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm just thinking out loud." Pause, considering my words carefully. "Tell me something. What does Patricia's social history look like? Support system, lifestyle factors, compliance with medical care?" Dr. Williams consulted his notes. "From what we gathered from the neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, she's been essentially isolated for years. No close family contact, few friends. She's been non-compliant with previous medical recommendations. Missed follow-up appointments, didn't take prescribed medications for hypertension. Mrs. Henderson mentioned that Patricia refused help from community services, insisted she didn't need anyone." "Of course she did. Patricia Whitmore, too proud to accept help, too stubborn to admit weakness, too invested in her role as the victim of other people's selfishness to recognize her own self-destructive patterns. Has she expressed any wishes about end-of-life care, advanced directives, healthcare proxy?"
"Nothing on file. And Mrs. Henderson said Patricia always claimed she'd rather die than be a burden on anyone." Dr. Williams looked at me curiously. Dr. Smith, why are you asking about psychosocial factors? This is a straightforward cardiac emergency. But it wasn't straightforward, and we both knew it. Patricia's case was complex, high risk, with significant probability of complications even if the surgery was successful. She was looking at months of recovery, possible disabilities, and a future that would require accepting help from others, the very thing she'd spent her entire life refusing to do. More importantly, I was finally understanding what Dr. Reeves had been trying to teach me. Saving Patricia's life wouldn't change who she was. It wouldn't make her a better person or a loving mother. It wouldn't heal our relationship or give me the childhood I'd never had. It would just preserve the existence of someone who had dedicated years to proving that love was conditional and that I wasn't worthy of receiving it. Dr. Williams, I said slowly, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. If this were your mother lying in this bed, what would you want someone to do? He didn't hesitate. Everything possible. No matter what our relationship was like, no matter what had happened between us. She's my mother. I nodded, understanding that his answer revealed the fundamental difference between us. Dr. Williams probably grew up in a family where love was secure, where mother meant safety and comfort and unconditional support. For him, the title mother carried an inherent value that transcended individual behavior. For me, Patricia Whitmore had spent 37 years proving that biology didn't create obligation, that giving birth didn't guarantee love, and that some people would always choose their own comfort over their children's well-being. I was no longer that desperate daughter seeking crumbs of approval from someone incapable of giving them. I was Dr. Sarah Smith, and I had the power to make decisions based on medical ethics, patient advocacy, and my own moral compass. Not on the fantasies of a little girl who'd never had the mother she deserved. Dr. Williams, I said slowly, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. If this were your mother lying in this bed, what would you want someone to do? He didn't hesitate. Everything possible. No matter what our relationship was like, no matter what had happened between us. She's my mother. I nodded, understanding that his answer revealed the fundamental difference between us. Dr. Williams probably grew up in a family where love was secure, where mother meant safety and comfort and unconditional support. For him, the title mother carried an inherent value that transcended individual behavior. For me, Patricia Whitmore had spent 37 years proving that biology didn't create obligation, that giving birth didn't guarantee love, and that some people would always choose their own comfort over their children's well-being. I was no longer that desperate daughter seeking crumbs of approval from someone incapable of giving them. I was Dr. Sarah Smith, and I had the power to make decisions based on medical ethics, patient advocacy, and my own moral compass. Not on the fantasies of a little girl who'd never had the mother she deserved. I need to examine the patient more thoroughly, and I want to review all the imaging before I make my recommendation. As I approached Patricia's bedside, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. For the first time in my life, I was about to make a decision about Patricia Whitmore based on who I was, not who she'd told me I could never be. The daughter she'd rejected was gone. Dr. Sarah Smith was in charge now. Word travels fast in small towns, and apparently it travels even faster when someone's life hangs in the balance. By 6 a.m., barely 2 hours after Patricia's arrival at Riverside Medical Center, my phone started buzzing with calls from Millbrook Valley. The first call came from Mrs. Henderson, her voice shaky with exhaustion and worry. Dr. Smith, I hope you don't mind me calling you directly. I got your number from the hospital directory. I'm the one who found Patricia, and I thought you should know she's been asking about you. I was in the hospital cafeteria, staring at a cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink, when her call came through. Mrs. Henderson, I'm already aware of the situation. I'm actually at hospital. Are you? Oh, thank goodness. I wasn't sure if anyone had contacted you. And Patricia, she She's been carrying around this letter for weeks. She kept saying she was going to mail it to you, but then she'd lose her nerve. A letter. Of course there was a letter. Because Patricia Whitmore couldn't simply have a conversation like a normal person, she had to create drama even in her medical emergencies. Mrs. Henderson, I need to focus on the medical aspects right now. Can we please just listen for a minute? Her voice carried the urgency of someone who'd been awake all night, watching her neighbor fight for her life. That woman has been miserable for 15 years. Absolutely miserable. She talks about you constantly, about how proud she is, about how she messed everything up, about how she doesn't know how to fix it. The second call came from Father Miguel Santos, the priest at St. Catherine's in Millbrook Valley. I'd never met him, but apparently he'd heard about Patricia's situation through the small-town grapevine that connected emergency rooms to churches to coffee shops in the matter of hours. Dr. Smith, I understand you're the cardiac surgeon treating Patricia Whitmore. I wanted you to know that our entire parish is praying for her recovery. She's been a regular at our Wednesday evening services for the past 5 years, never misses one. That stopped me cold. Patricia in church. The woman who'd spent my childhood railing against hypocrites who think God cares about their problems was attending weekly services? Father, I appreciate the call, but I'm not sure why you're contacting me specifically. Because Patricia talks about you during our prayer circle. Every week, she asks for prayers for her daughter who saves lives. She says she doesn't deserve forgiveness, but she prays that God will keep you safe while you're helping other people's families. The third call was the one that nearly broke my professional composure. Dr. Amanda Rivers, from Millbrook General, the woman who'd helped me establish the cardiac screening clinics, called with information that changed everything I thought I knew about the past 3 years.
Sarah, I heard about Patricia's emergency. I wanted you to know something that might be important as you're making treatment decisions. She's been coming to our clinics. What do you mean? The cardiac screening clinics you set up? Patricia has been attending them for the past 1.5 years. She never gave her real name. She registered as Pat Wilson and paid cash. But I recognized her from the old newspaper photos when she was active in the PTA 20 years ago. I sat down hard in one of the cafeteria chairs. She was there? At my clinics? Not just there, she was helping. She'd arrive early to help set up chairs, stayed late to clean up. She never spoke to you directly, but she was always there when you were. I think she just wanted to, be near you? See who you'd become? Why didn't you tell me? She made me promise not to. She said she didn't want to make you uncomfortable or complicate your work. She just wanted to help with something you cared about. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. For 18 months, while I'd been providing free cardiac care to her community, Patricia had been in the same room with me, watching me work, helping with my clinic, being proud of what I was doing, but too ashamed or too scared to let me know she was there. By 8 a.m., the calls had escalated to people I'd never heard of, but who apparently knew everything about my family history. Janet Morrison, who owned the diner where Patricia ate breakfast every Tuesday. Marcus Chen, from the hardware store where she bought supplies for small home repairs. Even Thomas Brennan, my old high school chemistry teacher, called to tell me that Patricia had been collecting every newspaper article written about me for the past decade. She's got a whole scrapbook, Sarah, Mr. Brennan said, his voice heavy with the weight of 15 years of secrets. She brings it to the diner sometimes, shows it to anyone who will listen. She tells people that her daughter is saving lives, that she always knew you were special. If she was so proud of me, why didn't she ever call me herself? Because she was ashamed of how she treated you, ashamed of what she said, ashamed that she let her own pain turn her into someone she didn't recognize. She's been going to counseling, started about 5 years ago, right after her doctor told her she needed to address her drinking. Counseling. Church. Helping with my clinics. Collecting newspaper articles about my achievements. This was not the Patricia Whitmore I'd carried in my head for 15 years. This was someone who'd been trying to change, trying to heal, trying to find a way back to the daughter she had pushed away. But the call that changed everything came from an unexpected source,
Jake Morrison, Janet's 18-year-old son who'd been working at the diner part-time while finishing high school? Dr. Smith, I'm sorry to bother you, but my mom said I should call. I've been listening to Patricia, Mrs. Whitmore, for like 2 years now, and I think there's something you should know. What is it, Jake? She's been practicing. Practicing what? Conversations with you. Every Tuesday when she comes in for breakfast, she sits in the corner booth and practices what she'd say if you ever came home. She writes it down on napkins, practices different versions. I've been clearing her table for months, and she always leaves these napkins covered with notes about how to apologize to you. The kid's voice was earnest, nervous, but determined to share what he'd witnessed. Last Tuesday, she was crying while she wrote. She kept saying to herself, "Just call her, Patricia. Just pick up the phone and call your daughter." But then she'd crumple up the napkin and start over. Did you ever read what she wrote? I wasn't trying to spy, but yeah, some of it. Mostly just "I'm sorry" written over and over, and stuff about how proud she is of you. And this one phrase she kept writing, "I was wrong about everything." By noon, I'd received 17 phone calls from Millbrook Valley. 17 people who'd watched Patricia struggle with regret for years, who'd seen her transformation from angry, bitter woman to someone desperately trying to figure out how to repair the damage she had caused. 17 witnesses to a redemption story I'd never known was happening. Dr. Williams found me in the family consultation room, surrounded by message slips from people I'd forgotten existed, all calling to tell me about the mother I'd never really known. "Sarah, I need your decision. Patricia's condition is deteriorating. We can't wait much longer." I looked up at him, and for the first time since this crisis had begun, I wasn't thinking about the woman who'd called me a waste of space. I was thinking about the woman who'd spent 5 years in counseling, who'd been attending church every Wednesday to pray for my safety, who'd been secretly helping with my community clinics while practicing apologies on diner napkins. I was thinking about the mother I'd wished I'd had, and realizing that maybe, just maybe, she'd been trying to become that person all along. Give me 5 more minutes. I need to make one more call. Because suddenly, there was one voice I needed to hear before I made the most important medical decision of my career. The call I needed to make was to someone I'd been avoiding for 3 years, Dr. Elena Vasquez, the therapist Patricia had been seeing. I'd found her name in Patricia's emergency contact information, listed not as family, but as counselor in case of crisis. Dr. Vasquez answered on the second ring, her voice professional but warm. "Dr. Smith, I've been expecting your call. Dorothy Henderson contacted me about Patricia's condition."
Dr. Vasquez, I know patient confidentiality usually prevents these conversations, but given the circumstances, Patricia signed a release form 2 years ago, specifically naming you as someone I could speak with if she was ever unable to communicate. She was very clear that if something happened to her, she wanted you to know everything. Everything. The word hung in the air like a promise and a threat. Dr. Smith, are you somewhere private? Because what I'm about to tell you is going to change how you understand your entire relationship with your mother. I was already moving toward my office, closing the door behind me and sinking into the chair where I'd received Mrs. Henderson's call 3 years ago. I'm listening. Patricia came to me 5 years ago on the recommendation of her primary care physician. She was drinking heavily, isolated, and what she described as drowning in regret. Our first session lasted 3 hours because she couldn't stop talking about you. Dr. Vasquez's voice was gentle but direct, the tone of someone accustomed to delivering difficult truths. She told me that the worst thing she'd ever done wasn't calling you a waste of space, though that haunted her. The worst thing was that she meant it when she said it. She genuinely believed in that moment that you were setting yourself up for failure and disappointment. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Because that's exactly what had happened to her. Patricia was accepted to nursing school when she was 19. Did you know that? I didn't. In all my years of knowing my mother, she'd never mentioned having any professional aspirations beyond the factory work that had supported us after my father died.
She was brilliant, Sarah. Top of her class, full scholarship to the State University nursing program. She was going to be a pediatric nurse. She wanted to help sick children. The irony was devastating. My mother, who told me I could never be a doctor, had once dreamed of healing people herself. What happened? She got pregnant with you. This was 1986, remember. Unmarried pregnant women weren't exactly encouraged to pursue professional careers, especially in small towns. Her parents were mortified. Your father was working construction, barely making ends meet. Everyone told her to be practical and forget about nursing school. I closed my eyes, seeing my childhood through a completely different lens. Patricia hadn't just been an angry, bitter woman. She'd been a woman who'd given up her own dreams and had spent 20 years watching them slowly die. She dropped out 3 weeks before graduation. 3 weeks, Sarah. She was that close to becoming the person she'd always wanted to be, and she gave it all up because everyone convinced her that being a mother was more important than being herself. But that doesn't... I'm not asking you to excuse anything. I'm telling you what shaped her. Patricia spent the next 20 years convinced that dreams were dangerous, that ambition was foolish, and that the safest thing to do was accept limitations and be grateful for what you had. When you came to her talking about medical school, she wasn't just hearing your daughter's plans. She was reliving the moment her own life took a different path. Dr. Vasquez paused, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. She said something in one of our early sessions that I wrote down because it was so revealing. She said, "I couldn't bear to watch Sarah go through what I went through. I thought if I convinced her she wasn't smart enough, she'd be safe from disappointment." Safe from disappointment by destroying my confidence? Dr. Vasquez's logic was damaged by years of depression and self-medication, but from her perspective, she was protecting you from the pain she'd experienced. She genuinely believed that if you never tried to achieve something big, you'd never have to face the devastation of losing it. I was starting to understand, but understanding didn't make the pain go away. Dr. Vasquez, why are you telling me this now? Because Patricia spent 5 years in therapy working to undo the damage she'd done both to herself and to you. She got sober, she addressed her depression, and she started trying to figure out how to repair your relationship. But every time she made progress, she'd hit the same wall. Which was? She believed you were better off without her. She'd convinced herself that you'd built such a successful life precisely because she wasn't in it, and that contacting you would only drag you back into the dysfunction you'd escaped. Dr. Vasquez's voice grew softer. Sarah, your mother has been writing letters to you for 3 years. Not practicing conversations like that young man at the diner told you, actually writing letters, long, detailed letters explaining everything, her childhood, her dreams, her failures, her regrets, and the pride in who you've become. How many letters? 47. She writes one every few weeks, pours her heart out, and then puts it in a shoebox under her bed because she's convinced that sending it would be selfish. She believes you've healed from the damage she caused, and she doesn't want to reopen wounds just to make herself feel better. 47 letters? 47 attempts to reach out, all kept locked away because she thought protecting me was more important than healing our relationship. There's something else you need to know, Dr. Vasquez continued. The letter Mrs. Henderson mentioned, the one Patricia has been carrying around, that's different from the others. She wrote it after her last cardiac episode 6 months ago, the one she didn't tell anyone about because she was too proud to ask for help.
She had another cardiac event? A mild heart attack that she managed at home with over-the-counter medication and sheer stubbornness. When she finally came to see me a week later, she was shaken. She said she'd realized that if she died without trying to contact you, she'd be stealing your choice about whether to forgive her. What does the letter say?
I can't tell you that. She needs to do it herself. But I can tell you that it contains information about your father's death that she's never shared with anyone. Information that explains a lot about why she became the person she was when you were growing up. My father had died when I was 12, suddenly and without explanation that made sense to a child. One day he was there, the next day he wasn't, and Patricia had shut down emotionally in a way that lasted until I left home. Dr. Vasquez, what kind of information? The kind that changes everything you think you know about your childhood. The kind that explains why your mother was so terrified of hope, so convinced that good things don't last, so desperate to prepare you for disappointment. She paused again, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of professional experience with family trauma. Sarah, I've been working with families for 25 years. I've seen a lot of people who've caused serious damage to their children, and I've seen people work to repair that damage. Your mother is one of the most committed clients I've ever had when it comes to genuine change and accountability, but she's also one of the most convinced that she doesn't deserve forgiveness. She's done the work to become the mother you needed, but she believes it's too late to matter. She thinks the best thing she can do for you is stay out of your life and let you continue being successful without her interference. I was staring out my office window at the city skyline, thinking about all the times I'd wondered what it would be like to have a mother who was proud of me, who supported my dreams, who wanted to be part of my life. And now I was learning that I'd had that mother for 5 years. She just hadn't been brave enough to let me know she existed. Dr. Vasquez, I need to ask you something directly. In your professional opinion, has Patricia actually changed? Or is this just someone who's gotten better at manipulation? Sarah, I stake my professional reputation on this. Your mother has done the genuine, painful work of examining her behavior, understanding its impact, and changing her patterns. She's not the same person who called you a waste of space. She's someone who's horrified by that person and has spent years trying to become worthy of your forgiveness, even if she never gets it. Especially if she never gets it. The changes she's made aren't contingent on you forgiving her. They're about her becoming the person she should have been all along. After I hung up with Dr. Vasquez, I sat in my office for exactly 13 minutes, staring at the photo on my desk, me receiving the Medical Excellence Award last year, smiling broadly as I held the crystal trophy that recognized my contributions to cardiac surgery. Patricia had been in the audience that night. Dr. Rivers had mentioned seeing someone who looked like her in the back row, but I'd dismissed it as unlikely. Now I knew she'd been there, watching her daughter receive recognition for saving lives, probably crying with pride and regret in equal measure. The woman I'd spent 15 years hating was gone. She'd done the work to become someone different, someone better. Someone who might actually deserve the title mother. The question was I brave enough to let her try? I needed to see those letters, not because I was ready to forgive Patricia, but because I was a surgeon, and surgeons don't make life or death decisions based on incomplete information. If I was going to choose whether to save my mother's life, I needed to understand exactly who she had become. Mrs. Henderson met me at Patricia's house at 2 p.m., her hands shaking as she turned the key in the front door. She said, "I haven't been inside since I found her this morning. It felt too much like trespassing." The house looked exactly the same as it had 15 years ago, but somehow smaller and sadder. The yellow walls had faded to a sickly beige, and there were water stains on the ceiling that suggested years of deferred maintenance. But as I walked through the living room, I noticed things that hadn't been there during my childhood. Books on addiction recovery, a meditation cushion in the corner, and framed photos of me that I'd never seen before. I asked Mrs. Henderson where she had gotten the photos. "She hired a private investigator about 6 years ago," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not to stalk you or anything invasive,
just to get photos from your graduation ceremonies, your award presentations, your wedding announcements. She wanted to see who you'd become. Wedding announcements. That was interesting, considering I'd never been married. Mrs. Henderson, I've never been married.
I know, dear, but Patricia didn't. She saw a photo of you at your colleague's wedding. You were the maid of honor, and she thought it was your own wedding. She kept that picture on her nightstand for 2 years before she found out the truth. We climbed the narrow stairs to Patricia's bedroom, and Mrs. Henderson pointed to the closet. The letters are in a shoebox on the top shelf. She showed them to me once when she was having a particularly difficult day. Said she wanted someone to know they existed in case something happened to her. I pulled down the shoebox with hands that were steadier than I felt. Inside were 47 envelopes, each one addressed to Dr. Sarah Smith in Patricia's careful handwriting. They were arranged chronologically, the earliest ones dated just 8 months after my phone call with her 3 years ago. The first letter was 12 pages long, written on both sides of lined notebook paper in the careful script of someone who wasn't used to expressing complex emotions in writing. Dear Sarah, I don't know if I'll ever send this letter, but Dr. Vasquez says I should write down the things I want to say to you, even if I never find the courage to say them. I know you probably never want to hear from me again, and I wouldn't blame you. But I need you to know that every single day since you left, I've regretted the words I said to you. I need to tell you about your father. I've never told anyone this story, not even Dr. Vasquez. But I think you deserve to know why I became the person I was when you were growing up. Your father didn't just die in a car accident, Sarah. He killed himself. I had to put the letter down and sit on Patricia's bed, my hands shaking as the words sank in. My father, the man I remembered as gentle and kind, had committed suicide when I was 12 years old. He'd been struggling with depression for years, but we didn't call it that back then. We just said he was going through a hard time. He'd lost his job at the factory, and we were behind on the mortgage. I was working double shifts at the diner, and he was taking odd construction jobs, but it wasn't enough. The night before he died, he told me he felt like a failure as a husband and father. He said he was worried that you were too smart for our family, that you'd grow up and realize your parents weren't good enough for you. I told him he was being ridiculous, that you loved us no matter what. But the next morning, I found the note. He said he thought we'd be better off with the life insurance money than with a broken man who couldn't provide for his family. He said he was sorry for being weak, and he hoped someday you'd understand that he did it because he loved us, not because he didn't. Sarah, I never told you this because I was terrified that if you knew your father gave up on life, you might think giving up was an option too. But what I didn't realize is that by keeping this secret, I taught you something much worse. I taught you that the people who are supposed to love you will abandon you without explanation. When you came to me talking about medical school, all I could think about was your father telling me you were too smart for our family. I was so afraid that if you succeeded, if you became the doctor you dreamed of being, you'd prove him right. You'd realize that we weren't good enough, and you'd leave us just like he did. So I tried to convince you that you weren't smart enough to succeed, because I thought if you stayed small, you'd stay safe. If you never tried to be more than what Millbrook Valley could offer, you'd never have a reason to leave me alone with all this grief and shame. I know how twisted that sounds now. I know that trying to keep you small was the worst thing I could have done, but I was so broken by losing him, so terrified of losing you too, that I couldn't see how my fear was destroying the very thing I was trying to protect. I read through 17 more letters that afternoon, each one revealing another piece of the puzzle that had been my childhood. Patricia wrote about her own father's alcoholism and how it had shaped her relationship with drinking. She wrote about the crushing loneliness of being a single mother in a town where everyone knew your business, but no one offered help.
She wrote about watching me excel in school and being simultaneously proud and terrified, because every achievement I earned was proof that I was destined for a life beyond Millbrook Valley. But the letters weren't just explanations and apologies. They were also progress reports on Patricia's journey toward becoming a different person. She wrote about her first AA meeting, about the shame of admitting she had a drinking problem in a town where everyone already knew. She wrote about starting therapy and how difficult it was to examine the choices she had made as a parent. Dr. Vasquez asked me today what I would say to you if I could have that conversation over again, the one where you asked for help with medical school. I started crying so hard I couldn't speak for 10 minutes. I would say, Sarah, I'm so proud of you for dreaming big. I'm scared because I love you and I don't want you to get hurt. But that's my fear to manage, not yours to absorb. How can I help you achieve this goal? What do you need from me to make this dream come true? I would say, you are brilliant and capable and determined, and those qualities didn't come from nowhere. They came from watching your father's kindness and your mother's work ethic, even when I was too broken to show that work ethic in healthy ways. I would say, I may not understand the world you're trying to enter, but I trust you to navigate it successfully. And no matter what happens, whether you become a doctor or change your mind and become something else entirely, you will always be my daughter, and I will always be proud of you. But I can't have that conversation over again, Sarah. All I can do is become the mother who would have said those things, even if it's too late for you to benefit from it. Mrs. Henderson had been sitting quietly in the corner chair, watching me read. When I looked up after the 18th letter, she handed me a tissue I didn't realize I needed. "There's something else you should see," she said gently, "in her jewelry box." I opened the small wooden box on Patricia's dresser and found, underneath a tangle of costume jewelry, a newspaper clipping from 5 years ago. It was a small article from the Millbrook Valley Herald about the cardiac screening clinics I'd established, but someone had highlighted every mention of my name in yellow marker. Underneath the article was a handwritten note. "My daughter is saving lives in the place where I once told her she'd never amount to anything. I don't deserve her forgiveness, but I'm grateful every day that she became the person she was meant to be, despite me, not because of me." There was also a small notebook filled with Patricia's handwriting, but these weren't letters. They were what appeared to be therapy homework assignments. Exercises in accountability, self-reflection, and behavior change. Write down 5 specific ways your words and actions harmed your daughter. 1. I told her she was a waste of space, teaching her that her worth was conditional. 2. I criticized her dreams instead of supporting them, teaching her not to trust her own judgment. 3. I made her feel responsible for my emotional state, teaching her that love comes with impossible obligations. 4. I withheld affection when she disappointed me, teaching her that she had to earn love through perfect performance. 5. I never apologized or took responsibility for my mistakes, teaching her that adults don't have to be accountable for the harm they cause. Page after page contained similar exercises. Write down 3 things you could have done differently in that conversation. Identify the emotions you were feeling that led to those harmful actions. Describe what genuine accountability would look like in this situation. This wasn't someone making excuses or minimizing harm. This was someone doing the hard, painful work of examining her failures as a parent and systematically working to understand and change the patterns that had caused them. By 5 p.m., I had read through evidence of 5 years of genuine transformation. Letters filled with insight, accountability, and love. Therapy homework that showed real commitment to change. A private investigation file that revealed a mother desperately trying to stay connected to a daughter she believed she'd lost forever. But the most powerful piece of evidence was a letter dated just 2 weeks ago, the one Mrs. Henderson had mentioned, the one Patricia had been carrying around, trying to work up the courage to send. Dear Sarah, I'm writing this because I had another heart episode last week, and it made me realize that if I die without trying to contact you, I'll be making the same selfish choice I made 15 years ago. I'll be prioritizing my comfort over your right to make an informed decision about our relationship. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a relationship. I don't even expect a response. But I expect myself to be brave enough to tell you the truth. I was wrong about everything. You weren't too good for our family. I wasn't good enough for you. You didn't need to be protected from your dreams. I needed to examine why I'd given up on mine. You became everything I was too scared to let myself become. And instead of celebrating that, I tried to pull you down to my level. That was my failure, not yours. I know it's probably too late, but I want you to know that if I could do it over again, I would be the mother who drove you to every interview, who helped you fill out applications, who believed in your dreams even when they scared me. I can't give you the childhood you deserved, but I can give you the truth you deserve. You were never a waste of space. You were always magnificent. And I'm sorry it took me 15 years to become brave enough to say so. With love and regret, your mother, Patricia. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope, my hands no longer shaking, because now I knew exactly who Patricia Whitmore had become, and more importantly, I knew that her transformation wasn't dependent on my forgiveness or approval. She'd done the work to heal herself and become the mother I needed, not because she expected anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do. Now, I had to decide whether that was enough.
I returned to Riverside Medical Center at 6:47 p.m. with Patricia's final letter folded in my pocket and a clarity I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. Dr. Williams was waiting for me in the cardiac ICU, his face grim with the kind of expression that comes when time has run out. Sarah, we can't wait any longer. Her pressures are dropping despite maximum support, and she's had 3 more episodes of ventricular tachycardia in the past hour. We need to make a decision now. I looked at Patricia's monitors, watching the numbers that told the story of a heart giving up. But, for the first time since I'd learned she was my patient, I wasn't seeing the woman who'd called me a waste of space. I was seeing the woman who'd spent 47 letters taking responsibility for that moment and working to become someone worthy of forgiveness she never expected to receive. Prep OR3, I said quietly. We're doing the surgery. Dr. Williams nodded, already reaching for his phone to alert the surgical team. But I stopped him with a hand on his arm. I need 5 minutes with her first. Alone. He looked confused, but didn't argue. The ICU staff moved efficiently around us, giving me the space I'd requested while preparing for the most complex cardiac surgery of my career. I pulled a chair close to Patricia's bed and sat down, looking at her face for the first time without the filter of 15 years of anger. She looked older, more fragile, but there was something peaceful about her expression that I didn't remember from my childhood. Even unconscious, she seemed less angry, less bitter than the woman who'd raised me. I read your letters, I said quietly, knowing she couldn't hear me, but needing to say the words anyway. All 47 of them, and I want you to know something before I try to save your life. I pulled her final letter from my pocket, unfolding it carefully. You were right about one thing. It is too late for you to give me the childhood I deserved. You can't undo the damage you caused or take back the words that shaped how I saw myself for years. If you survive this surgery, I won't magically become the daughter who calls every Sunday or visits for holidays. I won't pretend that your transformation erases the harm you caused. The ventilator breathed for her with mechanical precision, and the monitors continued their steady beeping. But I felt like she was listening somehow.
But you were wrong about something too. You said you don't deserve forgiveness, and maybe you're right, but that's not the point anymore. The point is that you did the work anyway. You became the mother I needed, not because you expected anything in return, but because you finally understood what love actually looks like. I stood up, smoothing the letter against my scrubs, and for the first time since I was 12 years old, kissed my mother's forehead. Thank you for breaking me in a way that made me unbreakable. The surgery took 11 hours and 37 minutes. It was the most technically challenging procedure I had ever performed, requiring not just the valve replacement and bypass surgery we'd originally planned, but also repair of complications that arose during the operation. Patricia's heart had more damage than we had anticipated, scarring that told the story of years of stress, poor nutrition, and what I now recognize as the physical toll of carrying crushing guilt and regret. At 4:23 a.m., I finally emerged from OR3 to find the waiting room filled with people I hadn't expected to see. Mrs. Henderson was there, of course, along with Father Santos, Dr. Rivers from Millbrook General, Jake Morrison from the diner, and at least a dozen other residents of my hometown who'd driven the hour to Riverside Medical Center to wait for news about Patricia's condition. "How is she?" Mrs. Henderson asked, rising from her chair with the stiffness of someone who'd been sitting in the same position for hours. "She's alive," I said, still in my surgical scrubs, exhaustion making my voice hoarse. "The surgery was successful, but she's not out of the woods yet. The next 48 hours will be critical." The collective sigh of relief that went through the waiting room was almost palpable. These people genuinely cared about Patricia Whitmore, which meant that sometime during the 15 years I'd been gone, she'd become someone worth caring about. "Can we see her?" Father Santos asked. "Not yet. She's in the cardiac ICU, and she'll be sedated for at least another day while we monitor her recovery, but I'll keep you updated on her progress." Over the next 3 days, I watched Patricia fight her way back to consciousness with the same stubborn determination that once made her such a formidable opponent. Her vitals improved steadily, and by Friday morning, she was alert enough to recognize her surroundings and respond to questions. I was reviewing her chart when Dr. Williams approached me with a puzzled expression.
Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know this comes from a place of professional curiosity, not judgment. Yesterday, when Patricia was first able to speak, the first thing she asked about wasn't her condition or her prognosis. She asked if her surgeon was okay. She wanted to know if the doctor who'd operated on her was getting enough rest. I looked up from the chart, not entirely surprised, because that was exactly the kind of thing the woman from the letters would do. Worry about someone else's well-being, even while recovering from major surgery. She still doesn't know it was me, does she? No, we haven't told her who performed the surgery. But Sarah, there's something else. She's been asking to speak with whoever's in charge of her case. She says she has information that might be important for her long-term care. I knew what information she wanted to share. She wanted to tell her medical team about her daughter, the cardiac surgeon who worked at this very hospital. She probably wanted to ask if there was any way to get a message to Dr. Sarah Smith to let her know that her mother was sorry and proud and grateful for the life she'd built. Dr. Williams, I think it's time I introduce myself to my patient. Patricia was sitting up in bed when I entered her room, looking small against the white hospital linens, but more alert than I'd seen her since her arrival. She was staring out the window at the city skyline, and when she turned to look at me, I saw recognition dawn slowly across her face. "Sarah?" Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from the ventilator, but unmistakably hopeful. "Hello, Mom." She closed her eyes, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. Not the angry, frustrated tears I remembered from my childhood, but something deeper, more relieved. "You saved my life," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Yes. Even after everything you did to me. Especially after everything I did to you." We looked at each other across 15 years of silence,
Two women who'd both been shaped by the same terrible moment, but had taken very different paths to healing from it. "I wrote you letters," Patricia said finally. "I know. I read them." "All of them?" "All of them." She nodded, fresh tears starting. "Then you know I don't expect anything from you. I don't expect forgiveness or a relationship or anything else. I'm grateful you're here. I'm grateful you became who you are. And I'm grateful that when I needed someone to save my life, that someone turned out to be the daughter I was too broken to appreciate." I pulled the chair closer to her bed, the same chair I'd sat in 3 nights ago when I'd made the decision to save her. "Patricia," I said, using her name instead of Mom deliberately, "we need to talk about what happens next. Your recovery, your care plan, and what kind of relationship, if any, we're going to have going forward." She nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue from the bedside table. "I understand. And, Sarah, whatever you decide, whatever boundaries you need to set, I'll respect them. You don't owe me anything just because you saved my life. You don't owe me anything at all." I smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd felt since this crisis began. "Actually, Mom, I think we might owe each other something, but we're going to take it one conversation at a time." For the first time in 15 years, Patricia Whitmore smiled back at her daughter, and it reached her eyes. 6 months later, I was sitting in my office at Riverside Medical Center when my assistant buzzed in with an unusual request. "Dr. Smith, there's a woman here who says she has an appointment, but I don't see anything on your calendar. Patricia Whitmore?" I smiled, checking my watch. "Send her in, please, and hold my calls for the next hour." Patricia appeared in my doorway looking healthier than I'd seen her in years. The cardiac surgery had been successful, but more than that, she carried herself differently now. There was a lightness to her that I didn't remember from my childhood, an ease that came from finally laying down the burden of secrets and shame she'd carried for decades. "Right on time," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "How are you feeling?" "Physically, better than I have in years. Emotionally, that's more complicated." Our monthly meetings had become a ritual over the past 6 months. Not mother-daughter lunches or family dinners. Neither of us was ready for that level of intimacy. Instead, we met in my office like the complicated adults we were, working through 15 years of damage with the patience of people who understood that healing doesn't happen on anyone's timeline, but its own. "I brought you something," Patricia said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "It's the last letter I wrote to you before my heart attack, the one I was carrying around trying to decide whether to send." I took the envelope, recognizing the careful handwriting I'd become familiar with over the past months. "I thought I'd read all of them." "You had, but this one was different. This one was actually meant to be sent." She watched as I opened it, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "I want you to read it because it contains the question I've been afraid to ask you directly."
The letter was shorter than the others, only 2 pages, written in the neat script of someone who'd thought carefully about every word. "Dear Sarah, I'm writing this letter with the intention of actually sending it, which terrifies me more than any surgery ever could. Dr. Vasquez says that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it. So here I am, acting in spite of every instinct that tells me to leave you alone. I've been attending your cardiac clinics in Millbrook Valley for 18 months now, not as your mother, but as someone who wanted to see the person you'd become. Watching you work, seeing how you treat your patients with such care and competence has been both the greatest pride and the deepest regret of my life. You became everything I was too scared to believe you could become. More than that, you became everything I never had the courage to become myself. You're not just a successful doctor. You're someone who chooses compassion over bitterness, service over selfishness, healing over holding grudges. I know I have no right to ask this,
But I'm going to ask anyway, because Dr. Vasquez says that recovery requires radical honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. If something happened to me, would you come to my funeral? Not because you forgive me, not because you think I deserve it, but because you're the kind of person who believes that everyone deserves to be mourned by someone who knew them when they were trying to be better. I'm not asking for a relationship. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking if, when I die, you'd be willing to stand in a cemetery in Millbrook Valley and acknowledge that Patricia Whitmore tried, in the end, to become the mother her daughter deserved. That's all. That's the only thing I've ever wanted to ask you. With love and hope, Mom. I folded the letter carefully, feeling the weight of the question she'd been carrying, because it wasn't really about funeral attendance. It was about whether I believed her transformation was real enough to merit witness, whether the work she had done to change herself was significant enough to acknowledge publicly. "Well," Patricia asked quietly, "would you have come?" I looked at this woman who'd spent 5 years systematically dismantling every excuse, every justification, every defensive strategy she'd ever used to avoid taking responsibility for the harm she'd caused. I thought about the 47 letters that documented not just apologies, but genuine understanding of her failures as a parent. I thought about the therapy homework, the AA meetings, the church attendance, the volunteer work, all of it done without any guarantee that I'd ever know about it, much less appreciate it. "Mom," I said, and I saw her eyes fill with tears at the word I'd started using again, only recently. "I wouldn't have just come to your funeral. I would have given the eulogy." She broke down then, the kind of crying that comes from finally receiving an answer to a question that's been keeping you awake at night for years. I handed her the box of tissues I kept on my desk for families receiving difficult news, and waited while she composed herself. "There's something else I need to tell you. Something I've been working on for the past 3 months." Patricia looked up, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "I've been offered a position as Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Millbrook General Hospital. It's a smaller program, less prestigious than what I have here, but it would allow me to expand the cardiac care available to rural communities throughout the region." Her face went through a series of emotions: surprise, pride, concern, and something that looked like hope. "You're thinking about moving back to Millbrook Valley?" "I'm thinking about moving back to serve the community that raised me. Not because I've forgiven the past, but because I've learned something important about the difference between running away from something and running toward something better." I stood up and walked to my office window, looking out at the city skyline that had been my view for the past 8 years. I spent 15 years building a life that proved I was worth something, that I could succeed despite having a mother who didn't believe in me. But what I realized, reading your letters, is that I'd built my entire identity around being someone you'd had rejected. My success was still defined by your limitations. Patricia was quiet, listening with the attention of someone who understood the weight of what I was saying. The woman who wrote those letters, the woman who's been sitting in this chair once a month for 6 months, taking responsibility for her failures as a parent, that woman raised a daughter who became a cardiac surgeon, not despite her parenting, but because somewhere in the chaos and dysfunction, she also taught me about resilience, determination, and the importance of not giving up on people who are struggling. I turned back to face her. "If I take the position at Millbrook General, it won't be because I've forgiven you for calling me a waste of space. It'll be because you accidentally taught me that spaces that look empty often contain the most potential for growth." Patricia smiled through fresh tears. "That's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said about our relationship." "It's not about our relationship, Mom. It's about who I choose to be now that I finally understand who you tried to become."
3 weeks later, I accepted the position at Millbrook General Hospital. Not because I wanted to live near my mother,
but because I wanted to serve the community that had shaped me, good and bad. Patricia and I still meet monthly, still work through the complicated process of building a relationship between two adults who share DNA and trauma, but are essentially strangers to each other. Some days are easier than others. Some conversations end with tears, others with laughter, most with the careful hope of people who know that healing is possible, but not guaranteed. We're not the mother and daughter we might have been if things had been different, but we're becoming the mother and daughter we can be now, with the knowledge and scars and wisdom we've each earned. 6 months ago, someone asked me if I believed in second chances. I told them I believed in people who do the work to earn them. Today, a woman called me at the hospital. Her voice was shaking as she told me about her teenage son who'd been struggling with addiction, who'd said terrible things to her, who'd pushed her away so completely that she didn't know how to reach him anymore. "Dr. Smith," she said, "I heard you speak at the medical conference about family trauma and healing. I was wondering, is it ever too late to try to repair the damage? Is it ever too late to become the parent your child needed, even if they're not a child anymore?" I looked out my office window at the small town I'd once couldn't wait to leave, thinking about the woman who'd spent 5 years learning how to apologize and the daughter who'd spent 15 years learning how to forgive. "It's never too late to start doing the work," I told her. "But you have to be prepared to do it without any guarantee that it will change anything between you and your son. You have to be willing to become the person you should have been because it's the right thing to do, not because you expect it to fix your relationship. And if I do that work, if I really change, really take responsibility, really become better," I smiled, thinking about monthly meetings in my office, about letters that documented genuine transformation, about the difference between earning forgiveness and deserving it. Then you'll be ready for whatever your son decides to do with that information. Because here's what I've learned. Some people call you a waste of space and mean it forever. But some people call you a waste of space and then spend years learning why they were wrong, working to become someone worthy of your success, and discovering that the space they thought was empty was actually full of potential they were too broken to see. The question isn't whether people can change. The question is whether you're brave enough to witness that change without needing to reward it. Have you ever been called something that changed how you saw yourself? Have you ever had to decide whether someone's transformation was genuine enough to earn your forgiveness? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes the most powerful healing happens when we realize we're not the only ones who've survived having our worth questioned by the people who were supposed to love us unconditionally. And if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that broken people can become whole and that empty spaces can be filled with unexpected growth, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because sometimes the most important stories are about people who refuse to let their past define their future. Sometimes waste of space just means room to grow.